Well, I'm Margaret Eriwata, and my husband's Nick Eriwata. We were in Malacca. I flew from England and we got married in 1967. And after we were married, we only had 3 days honeymoon. Nick was training for his vital training to go to Vietnam. So 1967, Nick went to Vietnam for 6 months. So we had some special moments. We had to make some special decisions on what we were going to do. And those decisions were, if anything were to happen to Nick, would I go back on to New Zealand or would I go back to England? My decision was I would go on to New Zealand to meet Nick's family, because of course they didn't know, none of our families came to New Zealand for our wedding except for my brother. The other decision was, were we going to try for a family? We've got a son here in Christchurch, and that was the son that was conceived before Nick went to Vietnam. So when he came back from Vietnam, of course I was 6 months or 6.5 months pregnant, yes. They were all born in New Zealand. The army flew us back when Nick came back from Vietnam. We only had a week or so. Because of my pregnancy, they made sure that they got us out of Malacca very quickly. And so it was a Bristol freighter to Singapore and a Hercules from Singapore back to New Zealand. Yes, so Shane, our firstborn, was born in Christchurch. Being married to a veteran, when Nick came back, we were stationed at Burnham Camp. And right from the very beginning, being in Burnham, the soldiers were very badly treated. They were told not to wear uniforms. They were told not to talk about where they'd been. There were no jobs for them. It was devastating to be married to a proud soldier who'd been away and fought and come home thinking they could have a normal life, to start with a family, and it wasn't like that at all. They would go to work and hide, because they didn't know what to do all day. And then they'd come home and try and pretend to their families, to me, everything was all right. So everything was inside, locked inside, couldn't talk about anything. So the strain was there from day one. But Nick tried very hard to be a lovely family man and tried very hard to find jobs. He could have gone to the SAS. He did fly up to Whenuapai. He did parachute jumps, passed all of that. So he could have gone, but he knew it meant that he would be away from me and our firstborn then. And he said no. He'd been away long enough. So he chose to stay home and try and find a job within the army. But it was very difficult, and they made things difficult for him because they just kept saying there was nothing for them. So Nick ended up carrying on in the army. Eventually we went to Waiouru. While in Waiouru, he had a head injury, a serious head injury, and it nearly cost him his life. And after the head injury, again, he did not get the help he needed. He was sent back to work, He couldn't remember where he was sometimes, didn't remember many things. Very bad headaches, very bad at making decisions. He was driving buses, and he would go somewhere and he couldn't remember how to get back. But they decided, the powers to be, his commanding officers, he was okay. You know, you just take an aspirin and you carry on working. And things just didn't improve. But Nick carried on, just like a soldier does. You're told you're okay, you just carry on working. And so he completed his 20 years, and he got out the army, and they deemed him to be fit, which was the biggest mistake. Nick wasn't a fit man. Physically, maybe, but mentally, not fit. He had 20 jobs in 20 years. By this stage, of course, obviously, we had 3 children. And they saw Nick, the decline, couldn't make decisions, couldn't hold down a job, because in Civvy Street, he didn't have somebody telling him what to do. If they did, he couldn't remember what to do. So it was very difficult. He might hold down a job for 3 weeks. Then he'd get into an altercation because somebody would tell him he'd forgot to do something. And he'd say, "You didn't tell me." So it always ended up in an argument. Nick was an angry, angry man because he didn't understand. He didn't understand what was wrong with his mind. It was like 2 wires being not connected. He couldn't think properly. And he didn't understand. If you told him one thing, he would remember. You tell him 2 or 3 things, he'd only remember maybe the first thing. So things got worse. And he got into quite a lot of strife. So things deteriorated quite badly. Our lives changed dramatically. Our children were very weary of Nick and his temperament and his anger. It affected them badly. And I still do not have answers as to how to help him. And I'm still seeking that to this day. I'm at the bottom of the cliff where if he'd have had help, maybe we would have been in a different position. So if these soldiers come back and get help, that would be a big thing for any soldier. Any soldier, whether it's physical or mental. But I want him to have as much happy days as he can. You know, he deserves that. He really deserves it. So I'll just keep going as long as I can. And I've got the support of my son. But as for Veterans Affairs, to see if there's anything, they are good with help for the home, but it's me. I don't see where I can have, there's no answers really. So I don't know. We'll just take each day as it comes. Yeah.